We'll now call the January 14th, 2020 regular meeting of the decade to order. So Happy New Year, Council. Item 2.1, adoption of this evening's agenda. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, any additions? Hearing none, all in favor? Carries. We have time for 3.1, public comments on items considered by council as part of the approved agenda. They will be regarding just an item on the current agenda, and please from the podium for those at home. They shall be addressed through the chair, answers given likewise. Debates with or by individual members of council or staff are not allowed during this time. No commitments shall be made by council in replying to a question. Matters which may require action of council shall be tabled to a future meeting of this council. Bylaws, temporary use permits, etc. that have been considered at a public hearing but have not yet received final approval shall not be raised during public comment periods. Individuals must state their name and just their area of residence for identification purposes, and comments and questions will be limited to 2 minutes. Upon hearing, welcome. Mr. Jamin.
Jamin, Valemount, BC.
Welcome.
It's not part of the agenda, but there was a motion to review the arts and cultural policy for the village, just to, as a reminder that was going to be done for the new year. I'm sorry that's not part of the agenda, but it was something that was designated in the previous meeting.
This agenda, please, Mr. Jamin.
Yes. And on this agenda, the proposal for the yard for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, I didn't see the environmental policy for that particular area, but that would be really important in that particular area. It's not by running water, but it's quite close to running water. And in my previous employment, there have been grievous breaches of environmental standards on the pipeline. And just to ensure that the village earmarks saying, this is very important to us, please follow all environmental regulations.
Just as a matter of procedure, should council vote in favor of that temporary use permit process, it's just the start of the process. You will have many more opportunities to speak and comment throughout this process.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rashmi Narayan and I live in Valemount, BC. Thank you. My comment is with respect to the CAO's report on the Valemount Cafe and just that kind of community engagement events. And I was really pleased to see the comments, and I was also pleased to see the recommendation to have 2 events a year. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comments this evening? Council, please motion to receive public comments. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson, all in favor? Carries. Item 4.1, adoption of the December 10th, 2019 regular meeting of council. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, any errors or omissions there? Hearing none, all in favor? Carries. 4.2, adoption of the minutes of the December 10, 2019 public hearing. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, any errors or omissions arising from there? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried. 5.1, we have a delegation from the BC Assessment Authority to give us an overview on the 2020 assessment roll. Please, council, welcome Mr. Darren Johnson, Deputy Assessor of Northern British Columbia. Podium is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor Torgerson and Council. We were asked to do this presentation as a result of a meeting between, I believe it was the Mayor and a councillor at the UBCM with BC Assessment. So the information came back to me and asked if we could do a presentation on the 2020 assessment roll. So that's why I'm here today. I've prepared a few slides. There's quite a number. I'll try and keep it within the time frame. And first off, I'd like to just apologize. I was using a template and I called it the District of Valemount, realizing it's actually the Village of Valemount. So my apologies for that. So this is an overview of the assessment process and the 2020 assessment roll. And I'm just going to talk briefly a little bit about BC assessment, how we value property, the property classifications, the overall assessment cycle and some of the key dates that we follow by legislation, the relationship between assessment and taxes, and the 2020 roll overview for the Village of Valemount. So BC assessment was actually created in 1974. Prior to that date, each local government or each jurisdiction had its own assessment organization. And in 1974, a committee was struck to review that and bring it into a provincial umbrella. So that's what we do today. We operate independently of the taxing jurisdictions, and we function independent of politics. So we are a Crown corporation. We function independently. And we operate under the Assessment Act and the Assessment Authority Act. The Assessment Act is our primary legislation for how we do our work. The Assessment Authority Act is more about the organization of BC assessment. And what we do each year, we publish an annual list of property values on the assessment roll. And that provides a stable and predictable tax base for local governments in BC. And on that assessment roll, we identify owners, property value, classification, and exemptions for each property. The provincial assessment roll represents over 2 million properties with a total roll value of $1.93 trillion. And again, this provides a base for local government and taxing authorities to raise tax revenues, which is approximately $8 billion provincially, which can be used towards the school taxes and local services. How we value different properties. Primarily, we work with market value. You'll get your assessment in the mail, and it will say the market value of your property as of July 1st. That's for residential and commercial properties. And market value, as you can see, the definition there is the most probable price which a property will bring in the open and competitive market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale, with the buyer and seller each acting prudently, knowledgeably, and assuming the sale price is not affected by undue stimulus. So an example of undue stimulus would be a foreclosure sale. If you get a couple of those in a marketplace, that's not necessarily indicative of the overall market. It's an undue influence. Then the other property types that we value at a legislated rate are the ones that don't normally transact in the marketplace. These are things such as major industry properties, sawmills, pipelines, mines, and they're valued using legislated rates. And property classification, there's 9 classifications of property. You can see them there: residential, utilities, supportive housing, major industry, light industry, business and other, managed forest land, recreational, and nonprofit, and farmland. Those 9 classifications of property are what each local government will use to determine how they apportion the taxes each year. The supportive housing category is probably something that you may not hear a lot about, but it is somewhat unique. It's a classification that's really designed for people that are at risk of homelessness, and those property types, specific properties, are determined by the government, and BC Assessment applies that classification. And by statute, the value on those properties is $2, $1 for the land, $1 for the building. But they're each year determined by the government, and BC Assessment applies that property class. The overall assessment cycle that we go through each year, if we start in January, like we are right now, from January 1st to January 31st, we've released the new assessment roll. Everybody's got their new assessments as of January 1st. And that's the time when people will often phone and inquire about their assessments and ask questions. If someone is not satisfied with their property value, they can appeal it to the Property Assessment Review Panel by January the 31st. The next step of the cycle is between February 1st and March 31st. That's when the Property Assessment Review Panel sits and hears the different appeals that have come forward. By March the 15th, the appeals have been completed, and then the revised assessment roll is provided to the local governments by the end of March. Between April and September, that's primarily the time of the year where we're doing other activities. We're going out inspecting new construction, changes to the assessment roll. We may be taking on projects that were a result of things we've learned through the inquiry period. We might have some information brought to our attention that we need to reevaluate and take a closer look at. So it's project work time that we spend to make the role better. And July 1st is a key date. That's the valuation date as per statute that we follow each year. And between October 1st and December 31st, that's really what we call our roll production time. That's when we start setting rates and actually putting together the assessment roll. October 31st is the actual state and condition date for properties. So if a house was under construction, we look at the condition and the state of it at October 31st for the next assessment. November 30th is the date that we use for ownership. So that's the land title date. Any ownership transactions that occur up to November 30th are reflected in the next assessment roll. And December 31st is a date that is used for properties that have become taxable or ceased to be taxable. So for example, in a rural area, someone might be leasing Crown land and that lease might have started as of December 1st. They are actually taxable for the next assessment year. So we would add them onto the roll because the taxability date is December 31st. This slide is just kind of added as a general overview of we provide the assessed values to the local government. The local government sets the property tax rates as per each class of property. You multiply that together and you get the overall property taxes, which are due July the 1st. This next slide is one that we actually have this in our information on our public website as well. We often get asked questions about my property assessment went up, like in this example, 40%. I can't afford a 40% tax increase. We try to remain independent of the taxes and we don't like to comment on that, but we get asked it so often that this slide helps kind of paint the picture that under the scenario where a local government is not going to change its budget is the same. If assessments go up, say, 3%, if your assessment went up at the rate of the average assessment at 3%, chances are unlikely you're going to see a tax change. However, if you go up higher than the average or lower than the average in your class, you will see very likely an increase or a decrease. That's about the best that we can tell the public, but that's really dependent on what council and the local government decides to do with their budgetary needs as well. So a bit of an overview of the 2020 roll. The provincial statistics are on the top line there. Overall, there's just over 2 million properties. It's gone up 1% this year, so not a lot of growth provincially. But the actual roll value, for the first time in many years, has actually gone down. It's gone down 2.6%. And a lot of that's due to the decrease in the market in the Lower Mainland where there's such high valued properties. And also the non-market change, NMC, that's the additional money that gets added to an assessment roll each year due to physical changes. It could be new construction, it could be a subdivision, it could be anything that's new to the roll that's essentially new revenue. And again, that's gone down partly because of demand in those bigger centers where there's not as much new construction and subdivisions taking place. So when you contrast that and compare it to Valemount, a much smaller jurisdiction, everything's at a different scale. I think there was one additional folio added this year, so that's why it's up 1% for the number of properties. The value on the roll for Valemount is $226 million. That's actual value, so that's before any exemptions. And then the non-market change, or the additional money to Valemount's roll, is about $6.9 million. Now, you have to be cautious on all those numbers because they are subject to the Property Assessment Review Panel, the revised roll, and any other changes that may take place throughout this year. So I've just added a 10-year comparison just as a visual. These are net general values. So they're the ones that would be taxed on. They're the taxable dollars, not the actual value. But you can see for the most part, with the exception of 2012 and 2013, Valemount's roll has been growing fairly rapidly. The last couple of years, much slower. But sometimes it's kind of nice to see a summary of years like that, just to see what's happening. This is the non-market change information. So again, that's that additional money to the roll that wouldn't have been here unless there were changes, physical changes to properties. So in Valemount, you can see by property class how that's broken down. The overall residential non-market change amount is just over $2 million. Business and other, $5.1 million. Rec nonprofit has gone down $283,000. And that other one, I'd actually have to look up that section of the Local Government Act. It's a bit of an obscure number there, so my apologies. I don't have that quote for you. It's a fairly small number, though. And again, that's subject to any further changes through the revised roll. And this is the completed roll. So this is the roll that your local government just received, and they're going to download into their database. And this is the overall changes by property class. And these changes do include that non-market change, that additional money. So overall, you can see that residential has gone up 1.58%, utilities 4.5%, light industry 0.32%, business and other 28.9%, that's a fairly significant increase overall. And that recreational category's gone down 49%. So overall, total roll change of 6.71%. So if you study this slide for a minute, this is the distribution of value. And on the top row, it shows the percent ranges. And then the numbers below it are the number of properties, or the number of folios as we refer to them. So when you look at the residential class, you can see that residential single-family dwelling, which is the second light blue row, most of the properties fell within the -10 to +5% overall. Some of them are at 0, some of them shifted. And there can be different reasons for those shifts. Part of that might be due to specific projects that took place where we were reevaluating how we did the assessments. And in fact, in the residential category, that is what happened for the most part. There were a lot of inquiries last year, and our appraiser took that information and decided to do a project and review how we were valuing the houses in particular. And that's why there's some shifts. Some of them went down, some of them went up. At the end of the day, we are hopeful that the roll looks much better to the public when they look up and down their street and they're comparing assessments. And you can see the other property classes there as well. The business and other is pretty much sitting around 0. There's only a few properties that shifted beyond that, but the majority of those sat in the pretty stagnant area. So this graph here is just a chart showing 4 years of sales and the trend over time. The red lines are our July 1st valuation date of each of those years. So we have this information, and I don't think you can see it on the public website for Valemount due to the small number of sales. But in some of the bigger jurisdictions, you would be able to see this. You could click right on it and see it yourself on our website. But it just kind of gives you an illustration. It's more meaningful when there's lots of data. It looks impressive because of the bars, but there's not a lot of data. When you look at the sales last year, there's a fairly small number of overall sales. And in fact, for the residential single-family dwelling, there's not a whole lot of shift between July 1st of 2018 and July 1st, 2019 in terms of overall market. So the median single-family dwelling price, this was what was published in the newspaper, and you may recall the number. Overall 5% change. So what that is taking all the single-family properties in Valemount, totaling them up, and dividing it by the number of properties. That's all it's representing. And you can compare that to I just put a sample of some other jurisdictions as a comparison. You can see that it's fairly close to what McBride is doing, which probably is a fairly relative community to Valemount. And then some of the other communities where there's some real rapid change, like Kitimat, for example, and Terrace, where they're heavily impacted by the LNG project that's going on out there. Affordable housing. So I was asked to put a slide in about this, and I just did a quick summary, basically. What that's all about is properties that qualify as affordable housing properties. They are subject to sections of the Assessment Act, sections 19.5 and 19.7, which directs us to recognize any restrictions on title that are registered on title. And those kind of properties have significant restrictions on the rent and what you can do with those properties. So BC Assessment has worked with BC Housing and developed a valuation model on those. And basically that model brings the value to 30% of what it would be if the restrictions were not there. So they do have a significant impact on value. But what I've noticed in some of the communities in the north, a lot of these properties are given permissive exemptions as well by local government. And in Valemount, when I ran the query, there were 3 properties that are considered, they have the restrictions, they're affordable housing. And I believe 2 of those have permissive exemptions. In northern BC, which is everything from the Caribou region up to the Yukon border, there's 178 of those properties. And throughout the province, there's 2,390. So there's a fairly significant number. And the last few slides are just information about our website. If you have not been on it, I think we've improved it quite a bit over the years, but it's quite simple to use. If you go to it, that's the first page you come to, and you can type in your property address or a neighboring property address, and you will see information come up on their property. Those icons on the bottom are also links to help you get to what you need quickly. For example, appeals. If you decided, I want to appeal, you can click on that link and file an appeal online. As well as the interactive property map, which I'll show you an example near the end of the presentation, that just is an overview that you can zoom in on and see the overall changes in your area.
1 second, Mr. Johnson. I have a feeling this will take us longer than 15. So I'll just ask for council's support through a motion to extend the delegation. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, all in favor? Carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I've probably only got 5 more minutes.
There'll be questions, I'm sure.
Sure. So this is just some examples. I just took these from Williams Lake, where I am. But here's an example of if you typed in an address, this is what you'd get. If we have a photo that was taken for a project from the street, it'll be available to you. You'll see the assessed value this year. You'll see the assessed value last year. And you'll see the basic information about the house, the age, the number of square feet, number of bathrooms, etc. And if it's sold, you'll see the last 3 sales on the right-hand side there as well. So it's quite useful to the public if you're wanting to look at your neighbors, for example, and just see how does that compare to mine. It's quite useful information. If you actually register an account with BC Assessment, which is free to do, you can see a little bit more information when you go in. You can actually see up to 10 years of history there for each property, and the percent change over 10 years, and the jurisdictional average over 10 years. So that's something that the public in the past years ago they'd bring in their own comparisons, and they'd do it all by hand. So we heard that many times and started to publish that on our website. And then the other information that is often useful is the sold properties tab. You can just click on that and it'll bring up sales ideally comparable to yours, but depending on how many are in your area, it might bring up all of them. And they just give you an example so that if you're looking at your assessment, you're saying, does this look right? By seeing those sales, sometimes that answers your question. You can say, wow, I didn't realize there were 3 on my street that sold for that kind of price. Or in some cases, sometimes people feel that they're overassessed, and that they bring that into their appeal because they feel that's evidence that will support their case. And also the neighboring properties tab allows you to see neighboring properties assessment. So it's at a glance, you can see the information, and again, ask yourself, does mine look comparable in terms of what I have to these assessments? And finally, the overall property market movement map here, that's available in any jurisdiction. The trick to it is to zoom in enough so that you can actually click. So it comes up at the provincial level, and if you didn't know, you may not realize you can go beyond Prince George, for example. So if you scroll in and you click on those gray areas, you'll be able to see the information about the change to single-family dwellings versus business class, for example. And if you click outside the gray in the rural area, you'll see whatever statistics we have for that as well. So there's quite a bit of information that's publicly available, and we often will direct people there first because sometimes they can answer their questions just by looking at that. But that is the presentation I have today. I am open for questions if there are any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Motion to receive the delegation, please. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson. Are there any questions of Mr. Johnson? Comments? None?
Not from me.
Wow,
Good presentation.
it was an excellent presentation. I have a few questions. Can you just give us a kind of Cole's Notes version of how your reevaluation, what was your biggest takeaway from that when you reassessed what an assessment looks like? Was it through appraisal processes? Was it through market trends?
So are you referring to like the changes we made in Valemount this year?
No,
or last
like
year?
you mentioned that through your review panel, you were able to take away some of the changes in valuation.
Right. So what happens during inquiry period and sometimes through the review panel period, we learn more information from the public. That could be, for example, somebody's been comparing up and down their street and they are pointing out some anomalies. Now, that's not uncommon to find a few, but if there's enough that we're finding inconsistencies or there's enough appeals, that could prompt us to take that away afterwards and start to re-examine. So what we would do is look at things like the housing area that we've classed that in. Is it still relevant? Does the market recognize that? Has there been more physical changes in the area that we haven't captured? Because that sometimes can happen. We may not have carried out a project to collect that information in years. So there can be a number of things that can cause a shift. There can be a lot of renovations that affect the effective age of the house. So even though it might be, say, a 50-year-old home, with all the changes, effectively it's 10 years old because it's had so much renovation. And that happens over time, but we're not always aware of it without actually sitting down and re-examining that. And the public is one of our best forms of audit because they scrutinize their assessment and they look at others. When we're doing it, it's on a mass basis, so statistically the numbers are fine, everything looks fine, but sometimes you're looking at such a high level, it's hard to see those details without the public sort of pointing it out and saying, we have questions about this.
Thank you. And I mentioned before, if you could highlight through some further research the three affordable properties. I think I have an idea of where they might be, but it would be advantageous to know where they are.
I can do that, yes. I can.
I know
email
one was
that.
on one of the slides.
Yeah, I can email that information to you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments from council? Anything that jogged you or want further? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you taking the time to come and visit us in a sound period just before the appeal or review deadline.
Well, thank you for your time. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. All in favor of receipt? Carries. Item 8, reading file. Is there anything there council wishes to pull out?
I just wanted to bring up number 10, the RCMP Appreciation Day, their official proclamation. It's a very pretty piece of document. I don't know if we're planning on doing anything at a local level for our RCMP.
We don't recognize proclamations, but what we can do, and I encourage you to reach out to local schools, local groups. One of the examples was to have school-age kids write postcards to their RCMP attachment, have presentations, which I'm sure they already do when RCMP visit the school, things of that nature.
It's a rather short timeline on this one.
It is. It is. I mean, there's always every February 1st of every single year from here on out. I will be writing a letter to to Sergeant Dean recognizing their 100 years of service. Is there anything else? I'd like to thank Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for their thank you and highlighting one of the sweetest grant opportunities I've ever come in front of. I believe we already have taken advantage of the first intake, but there is a second intake, so if there's something shovel ready, hopefully staff can jump all over it. And then number 7, the AKBLG is in Radium this year. We are dual chapter members, so AKBLG and CLGA. So if there is a wish from a council member or two that wish to go to Radium versus Prince George this year, let staff know. In fact, we'll probably have to have it through a resolution. So put your thinking caps on for the 28th. And then also like to thank Trans Mountain for their post-exercise report. Very informative, particularly through a spawning channel and into a grand reservoir. So hopefully they were able to gain some insight from there, and appreciative that their part of their feedback was more youth participation in those during those exercises, at least at an observation level. Item 9.1, the Valemount Cafe Summary Report. Please, Council, that the report be received. Councillor Pearson, Councillor MacLean, any feedback for staff on that report? Councillor Pearson?
Just want to say it was a really good summary for not having been in attendance for that. Some really good comments and takeaways from it, so for future.
All in favor of receipt? Carries. And that staff hosts 2 public engagement sessions in 2020 with at least one following the same format as the Valemount Cafe. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, discussion. All in favor? Oh, you're ready for the question? All in favor? Carries. Item 9.2, Valemount Community Forest is looking for us to authorize the CAO to sign investment authorization forms on behalf of the Village of Valemount. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, any discussion? Not great interest rates, but you get a $30,000 out of a $1.2 million investment.
The reference to short-term on that falls within the 2-year, is considered short-term, if on a need
Mr.
basis.
Administrator?
Yeah, so we actually went out for a legal opinion on that, and the Lidstone Company came back and stating that they felt that 2 years was the maximum that they could go for a short term.
Okay.
Further discussion? All in favor? Carries. Item 9.3, the North Central Local Government Association is looking for a resolution for attendees to be held in Prince George for their convention, May 13th to 15th. Who wants to go? Councillor Pearson? Councillor MacLean? Councillor G?
I've got nothing on the calendar for those 3 days.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Councillor Blanchette is absent, so how will that?
We can just ask her afterwards as well.
We can form the resolution and have cancellation.
Yes.
So why don't we entertain a motion that all of council will be attending NCLGA? Mr. Robinson, will you be joining us?
If council would like.
Come along.
Okay.
So all 5 council members and Mr. Robinson to attend NCLGA in May. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion. All in favor? Carries. Item 9.4, the building inspection report for December 2019, let it be received. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion. All in favor?
A
Oh,
lot of people building at this time of year.
it's not construction season. If they haven't poured concrete in at least the first week of November, they'll be waiting.
Especially at -40.
Takes a long time to cure. All in favor of receipt? Carries. 9.5, staff are looking to be named the lead provider of community visitor services through the operation of the Visitor Information Center, and a letter of confirmation be sent to Destination BC. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion. All in favor? Carries. And then, based on the reading file in 9.6, we have a RCMP report and statistics report to be received. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson, any comments on the report? Councillor Pearson?
238 kilometers an hour on the McBride side. Where did they find a straight stretch long enough for that?
Dr. Vogel's?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's pretty crazy.
Well, it was a plus 200 in this area.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of straightaways either, so poolies, maybe.
No, it was some good numbers.
I was pleased to see of the 10 requests or demands for roadside screening, that 0 failed. So word's getting around that it's not tolerated.
Yeah.
Further discussion? All in favor of receipt? Carries. 9.7, we have a wood stove exchange program report to be received. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, discussion on the report. Pity that we can't fudge marketing and education. No. All in favor of receipt? Carries. We have two resolutions to consider, please, in 9.8, Community Services Building Project. The first being that $10,000 be reallocated from the Public Library Accessible Doors Project to the Community Services Building Accessibility Upgrades. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, any discussion on the reallocation? All in favor? Carries. And that the contract for the Community Services Building Accessibility Upgrading be awarded to Steve Smith Contracting. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson, receipt on the award. Or sorry, discussion on the award. All in favor? Carries. 9.9, employee service recognition, that the report be received. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion on employee service recognition.
Kudos to all of them for the many years of service, 10 years and up, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. All in favor of receipt? Carries. 9.10, parcel tax rule review panel. It is legislated that we establish a date and time of the sitting of the parcel tax rule review panel to be held at the Village of Valemount Council Chambers with 3 members and a date between March 16th and 20th, 2020. So it was G. MacLean, Blanchette last year.
This says March 18th to 20th.
Sorry, March. Sorry. March 16th to 20th.
Yes.
Mine says 18 to 29.
Hmm?
Am I on the wrong one? March 18 to 29.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying, on the agenda item has the correct dates, I believe, and in the written form, it shows.
On the actual report, it says between March 18th to 29th.
We'll get some clarity.
I just need to know which week it is.
So I'm seeing the recommendations 16 to 20.
Yeah, but when you open up the report, the finance report, it says please note the review panel meeting date must be scheduled between March 18th to 29th.
Mr. Administrator?
If I might ask the Director of Finance.
Mrs. McNeil, can we please ask you to use the podium?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't remember the dates offhand, but I would go with a recommendation on the agenda, just because it's a shorter time frame, and I'd have it before that.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, within those 4 dates, I'm seeing 3 parcel tax review panel lists, having a 4th not here. So if you can check your schedules.
Did we already appoint the members though?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
we did.
Oh, we did?
We did, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, these are just for the time.
Okay.
and the date.
1, 2, 3. So Councillor Blanchette will have to adjust.
Yeah.
So try to avoid Tuesdays and Fridays per her schedule. Or keep it to the evening.
I can't do Tuesdays or Friday either that week.
Okay, okay.
Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Do you prefer daytime or evening?
I prefer evening.
Evening, fine.
1800, 1900? Before, after supper, what's your?
1800.
And so we got a time,
Monday? Does that work?
Monday the 16th. It should work for Councillor Blanchette. So, motion please. Councillor Pearson. That 1800 on March 16th.
16th for the parcel roll tax review.
Discussion? All in favor? Carries. Mr. Administrator.
Sorry, who seconded that?
Oh, Councillor MacLean.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Item 911, or 9.11, 9.11, Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, BC Air Access, looking, staff be directed to apply to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure 2020-2021 British Columbia Air Access Program in the amount of $23,265 for the purchase of a weather advisory station at the Valemount Airport. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion.
This would be hugely advantageous if we can get that there, so.
Yeah, it won't be forecasting, but it'll be instantaneous
Yeah, current, yeah.
with ceiling height, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Further discussion? All in favor? Carries. And that staff be directed to allocate $8,906 from the airport reserves in the 2020 budget to the Village of Valemount share of expenses. Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson, discussion. You have a disregard. All in favor? Carries. Good luck. 9.12, Trans Mountain is looking for a temporary use permit, and that the TUP 1901 for Block F of the southeast 1/4 portion of District Lot 7354, Caribou District, proposing a temporary contractor's yard be given initial approval. Councillor Pearson, Councillor MacLean, discussion. Councillor Pearson.
Well, I would echo Mr. Jamin's comments too on the environmental issues with the marsh being adjacent to that property, so as long as it comes up in discussion, so.
First of many
Yeah.
ways to comment. Further discussion? All in favor? Carries. Item point 13, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities Age-Friendly Communities Program. Staff are looking to be directed to submit a application to Stream 2 of the UBCM Age-Friendly Communities Program for the Senior Information Days project. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion. I thought the previous event was extremely well attended. Looking forward to another one. All in favor? Carries. Item point 9.14, target tenant demographic study, request for proposals. There is a recommendation that the target tenant demographic study contract be awarded to Spirit Exchanges. Ms. Rashmi Naring. What's council's wish? Councillor MacLean, Councillor Pearson, discussion. All in favor? Carries. Item 10.1 under bylaws and policies. Village of Valemount Business License and Regulation Bylaw number 805. Recommendation that the 805-2019 be adopted as presented. Councillor Pearson, Councillor G, discussion on final adoption. All in favor? Carries. And 10.2, Village of Valemount Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw number 813-2019 be given third reading as presented. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, discussion under third reading. All in favor? Carries. Council reports. 11.11. Councillor G, what'd you get up to in the last month?
Oh gosh, has it been that long? Other than my dog having puppies and having family visits, I haven't had any meetings, so I have nothing of note to report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor MacLean?
I only had one thing, and that was yesterday, and I had a Columbia River Treaty Local Governments Committee telecon with them yesterday afternoon, and that was it.
How'd it go?
It went well. We discussed what the final recommendations, what came out of the public meetings that were held, and kind of putting the final touches on what we were asking. That, and that was about it. Planning, we got a schedule for what's happening into the next year. And it's pretty preliminary stuff.
Coming here in April?
Only CBRAC.
Okay.
There's no funding. Their funding has been cut by 40,000 to fund the local government's consultation.
Okay.
So they're looking for regional districts to help with the funding on that. But this year they're not approaching the RDFFG. It's going to be the Associated Kootenay Boundary Regional Districts this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But CBRAC is,
CBRAC is still planning to come, but there possibly won't be enough funding for the people who are just local government to come as well.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay.
Councillor Pearson?
January 7th, had our first CVRC CCC meeting, so Canoe Valley Recreation Center Community Consultation Committee meeting.
Budget?
Budget discussions, and there was quite a bit of discussion in the role of the committee, transitioning from a management committee where, you know, we sort of had a little bit more input to the CCC, where it sort of comes more from Prince George administration and they kind of lay it on the line. And so we had 7 members attending, which covered all the different user groups of the arena for input. A big thing is as we say, is budget, trying to find ways to work within the set requisition. We can't look at a new requisition until 2023, so we're working on that set number for the next few years yet, so it makes it interesting. The one thing that is good is they're looking for a lot of forward-looking funding for upgrading and changing the plant. There's a low ammonium system out there that takes away a lot of the risk and downgrades staffing requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a good healthy discussion with Mr. Higgins from Regional District in Prince George, and we're moving forward. So that was pretty much it for the CVRC. And then earlier today, tourism committee meeting.
Awesome.
So
19th of December, I was at regional board. Office was closed, came in for a couple of days there. On the 6th, I had a Columbia Basin Broadband Corporation orientation by their COO there. The trust board has appointed me to one of their subsidiary companies on their board of directors, so very informative orientation there. Mr. Robinson and I had a meeting with Ministry of Transportation the following day on the 7th, a follow-up from Minister Trevina's meeting at UBCM regarding airports and their corridor study, mainly. And that was the gist of it. It's due out soon, the corridor study. I'm missing something. Oh, back in December, sorry, the 17th, I had a brief discussion with Trans Mountain, which wasn't favorable that day, but turned out to be favorable. And that's my report. Motion to receive, please. Councillor G, Councillor Pearson, any other questions of the council and their reports? Hearing none, all in favor? Carries. Was there a question? Sorry, Councillor Pearson.
actually, it was more a comment, and thank you to CAO Robinson for contacting Via Rail for signage for the Via Rail stop. I haven't driven by to see that it's up yet, but apparently it has been received and should be up if it's not already. So
pointing people to the heated shelter.
The heated shelter and the presence of the Via Rail app to tell them how late the Via is that day.
Or on how on time it might be.
Yeah, it could be that too.
Very good. Yeah, well done, Mr. Robinson. Thank you for taking that initiative. Any further comments on public or on council's reports? All in favor of receipt? Carries. No new business. No need to proceed in camera, so I'll ask for adjournment. Councillor Pearson, thank you very much.